Thank you, Claudia. You know, if you want to see the video that gave us Benghazi, what you do is you go to YouTube and search for Joe Biden, September 6, 2012. That was his speech on the final night of the Democratic Convention, in which he said, after informing us that Barack Obama has a spine of steel, he said that thanks to him, Osama bin Laden is dead and General Motors is alive. The narrative of the campaign to which Claudia alluded. Well, at least things are going swimmingly for GM, huh? Now to deliver the first prize, although not the final prize, but the penultimate prize. The first prize for the Walter Duranty Award for journalistic mendacity. Sorry, we're filled with Rogers here. Roger Kimball.
Well, you'll see that this pudding has a theme tonight. And well, on the subject of foodstuffs, I'd like to just revert to that omelet that Mr. Duranty referred to. Of course, many of you here will know that George Orwell famously responded, okay, to make an omelet you have to break a bunch of eggs, but where's the omelet? About the Soviet Union. Well, oh, what a tangled web we weave. Now, the best authorities tell me that Sir Walter Scott did not, in fact, have the administration of Barack Obama in mind when he wrote those lines. Nor, I suppose, did the later wit who completed Scott's lines with the observation that, but when we practice quite a while, how vastly we improve our style. Still, I'm struck by the uncanny pertinence of that little ditty to what was, for a few nanoseconds, described by some as the most transparent administration in history. Remember that? Now, we award the Duranty Prizes for conspicuous achievement in the field of journalistic mendacity. Were we to broaden the prizes to include political mendacity, as has been suggested earlier tonight, the Obama administration would afford an embarrassment, well, not of riches exactly, but an embarrassment of tempting candidates for one or more Duranty Awards. Remember, if you like your health care plan, you can keep your health care plan, period. Remember, too, that there is not a smidgen of corruption, not a smidgen of corruption in the IRS. Just ask Lois Lerner if you can get her to set aside her taking the Fifth Amendment for a moment. And remember also what Claudia has spoken about, the events of September 11th, 2012, the riots in Cairo and the massacre in Benghazi. They, of course, were sparked by a sophomoric internet video about a notorious medieval anti-Semite and pedophile. Those riots and the massacre had absolutely nothing to do with any failure of Obama's policies with respect to the Islamic world. How could they? Obama himself has said over and over that he decimated Al-Qaeda. He told us so himself many times, just as he had told us as far back as 2007 that Muslim hostility toward the United States would end the day he was inaugurated, the very day he was inaugurated. I'm only surprised that he didn't add period. Now I wonder what the families of the shootings at Fort Hood or the bombings at the Boston Marathon and indeed the massacre at Benghazi might have to say about that. But hey, dude, that was a long time ago. Well, there's a lot more I could say about the most transparent administration in history. And as it happens, this year's first prize winner of the Walter Duranty Award for journalistic mendacity has earned his laurel crown for aiding and abetting one critical and indeed ongoing episode of the Obama administration's fraud and dissimulation practiced against the American people. I mean the many centrifuges of spin, lies, stonewalling, and cover-ups that have emanated from the administration about Benghazi since the White House was first informed that someone had blundered on September 11th, 2012, even as former Navy SEALs Ty Woods and Glenn Doherty were fighting to save their lives and the lives of many other people in that CIA annex. Now, it's partly to shore up the Obama administration's narrative about Benghazi, and partly to pave the way for the possible return of what difference does it make Hillary Clinton that the New York Times published David M. Kirkpatrick's extraordinary saga, A Deadly Mix in Benghazi, on December 28, 2013. You know from the citations of my fellow judges, you know from their citations that that the many runners-up this year, it's a rich field. It's a rich field for journalistic mendacity. But we all felt that David Kirkpatrick was the clear winner, and indeed a worthy successor to the eponymous inspiration for this prize, Walter Duranty. Roger Simon's already told you a bit about him, but think about this. He telegraphed back to the New York Times in 1933 the grateful news that, quote, any report of a famine in Russia is today an exaggeration or malignant propaganda. Roger mentioned the death toll of 1 million. I have read that the death toll from Stalin's deliberately engineered famine was 7 million people. I mean, this is a man who had the windows on trains soldered shut so that people going through Ukraine at the time could not open them and throw food out to the starving people. An incredibly monstrous episode. Now, Duranty, as Roger mentioned, was awarded the Pulitzer Prize in 1932 for his reporting from the Soviet Union, which I think provides a pretty good sense of exactly what that award is worth. For its part, the New York Times has resisted repeated calls to revoke Duranty's award, perhaps feeling that once started down that slippery slope, they would not know where to stop. Now, one of the most impressive things about A Deadly Mix in Benghazi is its detail. It's a long piece. It's divided into 6 chapters, from warning signs through bedlam and aftermath. It's accompanied by dramatic photographs, maps, schematic drawings. The internet version even has these nifty animated graphics, so you kind of click on it and it shows you, people moving from one compound to the other. It's pretty impressive, really. The essay practically screams, please give me a Pulitzer Prize. Well, I doubt that will happen, partly because the ink was not yet dry on that day's fish wrap, before its central contentions were authoritatively disputed, and partly because the abundance of detail there is little more than an insubstantial smokescreen. Let's start with the story's main contentions. Quote, months of investigation by the New York Times, David Kirkpatrick writes near the beginning of his piece, centered on extensive interviews with Libyans in Benghazi who had direct knowledge of the attack there and its context, turned up, and here's contention number 1, no evidence that Al-Qaeda or other international terrorist groups had any role in the assault. And contrary to claims made by certain members of Congress, you know which ones, and here's his contention number 2, it was fueled in large part by anger at an American-made video denigrating Islam. Now, unfortunately for David Kirkpatrick, his story hadn't even been packed up for the weekend recycling before a House Intelligence Committee report concluded, pace the New York Times, that the Benghazi attack was, quote, an Al-Qaeda-led event. The culprit was, quote, not a video. Representative Mike Rogers observed that the whole part of the video thing was debunked time and time again. It was not a spontaneous uprising, as was put about by the Obama administration at the time, and was, with certain qualifications, reprised by David Kirkpatrick. Rather, it was a, quote, pre-planned, organized terrorist event orchestrated by Al-Qaeda. Now, there has emerged, since that House Intelligence Committee report, a steady trickle of corroborating detail as group after group has wrested via Freedom of Information suits, more and more facts about Benghazi from the most transparent administration in history. For example, not only do we know that the murderous terrorist attack that left 4 Americans dead was orchestrated by al-Qaeda, we also know that the Obama administration knows, because the Pentagon intelligence has publicly told us that they told the Obama administration this. The drip, drip, drip of revelations about Benghazi suddenly turned into a cataract last week after Judicial Watch managed, via yet another FOIA suit against the administration, to disgorge what some have been calling the smoking gun prep call email sent by Ben Rhodes, Obama's deputy national security advisor, to help prepare Susan Rice, Obama's ambassador to the UN, on her way to that whirlwind trip around the television shows that Claudia mentioned just a few days after the massacre, to explain, or rather, to utterly misrepresent what happened. Among the talking points Ben Rogers supplied for the guidance of Susan Rice were the advice to, quote, underscore that those protests are rooted in an internet video and not a broader failure of policy. Heaven forfend. The time, remember, was September 2012, just a few scant weeks before the presidential election. It was not a moment when the Obama administration wanted the issue of executive competence bruited about. Now, the poet Delmore Schwartz once observed that even paranoids have enemies. Delmore would have liked the whole wheels within wheels story about Benghazi. He would, for example, have savored the detail that Ben Rhodes is the brother of David Rhodes, head of news at CBS, which has maintained an almost autistic lack of curiosity about Benghazi, and which cut loose their one inquisitive investigative reporter, Cheryl Atkinson, when she exhibited troubling signs of wanting to do her job and actually find out what happened. Now, let me end with a few observations about the smokescreen aspect of David Kirkpatrick's essay. Many months of exhaustive investigation, and what does the Times produce? Not only was it dead wrong in its major contentions, but consider the questions it doesn't answer or even doesn't even raise. We learn that Ambassador Chris Stevens and the heads of some local militias got together and snacked on Twinkie-like cakes on September 9th. But how about these other questions, these other interesting questions? How did Chris Stevens actually die? Why has there been no autopsy published? Why did the US military not try to intervene? There were assets in Italy a scant hour away. There was a stand-down order issued to Ty Woods and Glenn Doherty. Who was the ultimate source of that order? And speaking of ultimate sources, where was the ultimate source that night? Where was Barack Obama? We have it on the authority of Tommy Dude Vitor, a former national security spokesman, that Obama was not in the Situation Room that night. Where was he? What was he doing? Preparing for his fundraiser in Las Vegas the next day? We don't know. Why wasn't answering that question, part of the New York Times' exhaustive research? We'll probably never get the full answers to most of these questions, but David Kirkpatrick's elaborate exercise in ideologically motivated historical revisionism nevertheless really is something special. It exhibits a mendacity that is both deep and insinuating, poaching skillfully on the tattered but still powerful reputation of a once great newspaper, coolly reinforcing the partisan damage control concocted as the 2012 presidential election entered its final phase, and subtly disparaging any counter-narrative that might be thought damaging to the administration's skein of lies. My own suspicion is that David Kirkpatrick's ultimate ambition had less to do with salvaging President Obama's crumbling reputation than it did with removing obstacles littering the way toward Hillary Clinton's eventual nomination in 2016. I also suspect, however, that recent revelations have put paid to that enterprise, just as they have definitively revealed a deadly mix in Benghazi, to be little more than a congeries of lies, half-truths, and ideologically motivated obfuscations. So, Congratulations to you, David M. Kirkpatrick. The judges were enthusiastically unanimous in recognizing your unsurpassed claim to first prize in this year's Walter Duranty Award for Journalistic Mendacity. Dude, you deserve it.